So, Akash, let's dive back in there. There's so much to unpack. So we're talking about space lasers, and we're talking about the granularity that they provide. In addition to obviously the on-ground truthing, effectively the measurement piece, the older satellites that give you this broader 2D view, and effectively you're collecting or intermingling the data, right, to effectively get a better and more accurate view of the carbon content. Is that a fair statement?
Pretty
to
much,
make?
yes.
Okay, great. So that's fantastic. But now being a kind of rational commercial actor, let me ask you a question. From a cost perspective, each one of them have costs associated, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
Sending people on the ground to sample the terrestrial forest is one thing. I can't even imagine measuring the biomass density of mangroves because they're notoriously difficult to penetrate.
Definitely.
And but then now we're talking space lasers. That's now we're talking in 2 orders of magnitude greater in terms of more expensive. So there's a cost question.
Yep.
Then there's a cost of actually analyzing that vast array of data.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with the second one.
Okay.
What does the computing power look like that's required in order to analyze that data to give you that higher level of confidence and granularity? And then where's that balance between the on-ground sampling and then the new, let's call it the new science, the geospatial side?
Okay. Do you remember how much RAM your first computer had?
Yeah, I had four megabytes of RAM.
4 megabytes of RAM,
Yeah.
right?
And then I upgraded to like a 16 meg.
And it was amazing.
And it was like the biggest step up. It
Exactly.
was 2 orders of magnitude greater. It was amazing.
The access to computing technology has, the hardware at least, has become much easier for people like us. I could walk into Simling Square and I could, within a couple of $1,000, set up a computer that could rival NASA, the one that sent people to the moon.
Yeah, wow.
Okay, even better than that, actually, much better.
Probably more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
it reminds me of like the old modems. I mean, we're clearly Gen Xers, but I remember the dial-up modems.
The sound in the back, right? Yeah. But here's the thing. It actually doesn't require that much hardware power to process that anymore.
Okay.
Courtesy of platforms such as the Google Earth Engine, right?
Really? Okay.
And software such as R as in just R.
Yes.
So what has happened is that in the last 10 years, open source platforms have allowed people to access processing powers way beyond what they could access 10, 20 years ago without having to break the bank.
Great.
For example, Google Earth Engine. So Google Earth Engine is an online platform. You run it in your browser, so you could run it on your iPad if you wanted.
Really?
And it has all the world's important big data sets available in the backend. You write code, but it doesn't run on your iPad or it doesn't run on your computer. You send the command to Google server, they run it in the back, and then they send you the results.
Well, that's
Which means that someone with a Pentium 2 processor, in a developing country where that's the best resources they have, could process space data from their home or from their school, whatever they want.
Wow, that's awesome. I didn't even think of that. That is fascinating.
That is the accessibility that's available. And the Jedi data is available there, Landsat, Sentinel, all these data sets are available.
But there's a cost, I would imagine, to access that data, no?
You create a Google account, which is free, and that's it.
And that's it?
That's it.
Fantastic.
That's good. And for students, for researchers like us, it's great. And then the things that you cannot do online, software such as R from the CRAN network, they okay, do you remember trying to do statistical calculations in Excel? It's a nightmare.
Yeah, it's a nightmare.
And then we used to have to figure out all of these different softwares or pay for them. RStudio is open access. It's free. You can download it, and it's a community of developers across the world. And I can install a small piece of software, and I can process all the data I want. And it's designed to run with machines that have the latest i9 processor to machines that have a small i5 processor from 10 years ago. It can run across all of them and let you process data, create models, create figures, whatever you want. You just have to take that extra step of learning how to do it, and that's it. And the cost is very little now to process the data. In some cases, for example, when I need to process large data, I have to have the computer running for a week sometimes.
Okay.
But
so there's still a time scale in order to compute those
depends on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, sure.
But for majority of scientists, PhD students, master students, that barrier to accessing the processing power is not there anymore.
Okay, fantastic. That's great because that just reduced the barrier of entry.
Yep.
Okay, but there's still arrays of data. I don't even know what is it, petabytes, some order of magnitude greater probably in terms of the information that's there. So now I would imagine it's accretive. You start to analyze, you start to get a better view and calculation of the carbon that's captured in these ecosystems. You also see the competing interests in terms of deforestation. You start to see the reforestation, afforestation initiatives, and you see it over a timescale because you mentioned the time points. Okay, great. But where are we at in that? Let's go back to scale. Where are we in that scale in terms of mapping the biome? If I can just stump you with that kind of question, maybe it's a bit of a late question.
I just want to link it back to the cost
sure,
part as well, right?
Yeah.
What is the cost of setting up 10 plots in a forest in Borneo?
Oh, yeah, great.
It's everything from flying people in, the local support staff, the permits, the equipment that you need to get in there, the time that you spend in the forest, collecting the data and coming out. Collecting the data is actually more costly than processing the data right now.
Yeah, right.
It used to be the opposite some time ago. And then we have these two different scales of setting up 10 plots in a forest in Borneo versus launching a satellite into space. Okay, one has a very high startup cost, launching a satellite into space.
Sure, that's
like
that's not for everybody.
Exactly, but I can still get 50 people going into the forest, covering a plot in 2 hours, moving on to the next plot. It'll be cheaper at a smaller scale, but that is cheaper at a much larger scale. The upfront cost often is borne by governments and the research industry, but the data, when it becomes available to the larger public, the per cent value of that data is so much cheaper there.
Because again of the leverage applied.
Exactly, and
scale. Okay,
you're doing it from space. The Landsat has been up there for 30 years, and the cost that you spend back in launching it to now the data it provides, it's invaluable. So there is the cost of setting up on the ground versus the satellite. Now, I think if the processing power is available, money is not an issue to analyze data.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. All right, so that's great. So now we've taken me again through this very interesting and meandering path about your origins, how you came around to this, the curiosity that sort of sparked this focus on ecosystems and nature. Now we've gone from the bottom up and top down again. So now let's kind of fast forward and assume that there's a lower barrier of entry in terms of, like you just said, in terms of analyzing that data. So are we compressing essentially the error bars that we were talking about earlier?
Yeah.
So we're having a much more granular view of the carbon in these ecosystems. So that's great. Gives us more confidence to then ultimately determine the value of those ecosystems in terms of the carbon component and the tradable instruments. How do you see that actually materializing now in the real world? It seems that there's still a lot of people that maybe not have the expertise, or I should say most likely don't have the expertise that you certainly have, that are very critical of baselines and dynamic baselines, and that there's this overcrediting spectrum. But from your perspective, effectively, it's science. It's improving over time, and you're reducing those error bars. I'd love to hear your perspective on that issue.
How often do you hear news about when a project has overestimated the carbon it sequestered? You hear it.
Yeah.
How often do you hear it when it's underestimated?
Never.
Exactly. Right. And
because those clicks don't sell.
Exactly. So and the way the science works, the way it's done is that there are going to be errors, right? But sometimes the error will fall on overestimation, sometimes it will fall in underestimation.
Okay.
And that's it. It comes with the package. And the great thing about humans is that we can get together having very closed understanding of their own workspaces, but work together on something that's bigger than everything else.
Multidisciplinary.
Exactly. That's something we are good at. And I think if you're a leader in a carbon space, you're really good at bringing these kind of people together. So in terms of where I see the work going, right? I see a lot more scientists working with the private sector and the businesses.
Right.
I think 10 years ago, it's very rare to hear scientists talk to businesses. It was like like a cat and a Tom and Jerry situation.
Completely. We talked about that the first time we met. Because essentially, we share some commonality here in my journey. But effectively, I said to you, I used to be a biochemist, but then I defected to the dark side.
Exactly.
We had a good laugh.
Yeah.
But I don't think that distinction is there anymore.
Not anymore. I think now, in the current generation, we accept that we have to work together.
Yeah.
And it's you and me versus the problem, not you and me against each other.
Right? Yeah.
So I
That's
feel
great. I love that. I just want to focus on stressing that point. That's an optimistic view, but it's also really rational. essentially working collaboratively to achieve and defeat effectively sort of mispricing here of this externality in regards to carbon, but protecting the actual ecosystems, right?
I remember this gentleman I spoke to when I was a master's student. He was working as the environmental manager in an oil company. And back then I asked him, like, what's it like working here? And he's like, the money is great, but they don't really listen to what I have to say, because at the end of the day, it's oil is the business. But I think that has changed now. I think it has moved where the scientist is not someone sitting in the back with crazy hair typing on a computer. The scientist is like, guys, I think this decision is not really great for the long term, and companies want to think about the long term now, and the scientist has a voice in these decision making, and I think that is absolutely important.
That's great.
And the fact that people listen to that voice is makes the scientist more confident, saying, okay, there's a space for me here where people listen, and I'm also willing to listen to the other end. At the end of the day, I'm like, I understand if this product is not made, for example, this company will not exist. But at the same time, I want to find the balance of the middle ground. So I think that is the current space of working in the industry, and I think that's great.
I think absolutely, and I'd love that to be more discussed more often in the broader narrative. So that's fantastic. I love that sense of optimism. Now I'm just going to round like home base here and ask you a question. And so I'm going to get a little bit serious. No, I'm actually joking. If you had $1 billion, I just just some Easter eggs in terms of different movie references that we've made throughout this conversation.
Okay.
But if you had $1 billion, where would you spend it in order to help to advance A, the science, and B, the outcome here around valuing carbon?
Ooh. Can't decide if $1 billion is a lot or it's not in the
Okay,
current
well,
economy.
just
I know.
X billion.
A
right?
blank
It
check.
could be
First, I would raise the salaries of
10 or 100.
postdoc students
Okay,
and
great.
PhD students. I think that's definitely.
No doubt, because that's a hamster wheel, right? Always seeking for funding and just being constantly in publication,
Exactly.
etc.
Yeah.
So a lot
Sometimes
would
even if
benefit
you
that.
have the funding, the rent goes up and your funding, your salary barely covers it.
Yep.
I remember reading once, they said that in a perfectly idealistic society, the teachers would be the richest people.
Yeah.
Okay.
But they're not.
They're not.
That's
So
bizarre.
apart from that, I would try and invest more in space lasers, more LiDAR technology, something
Okay.
that can help us better understand the physical structure of the planet from far away. I think that's still there. Luckily, NASA's doing it, and
Fantastic.
European missions are doing it. India's becoming the space for launching into space.
Of course.
So there's a lot of data coming
And there's
there.
private sector actors.
Exactly.
Whether it's Blue Origin
I
or
would
SpaceX.
I would use money to get more field work done. I think field work is not appreciated as much. I think a lot of us want to work in offices in aircon, but some of the really good stuff happens in the forest. And getting people into that space needs money, especially when you're working across political boundaries in Southeast Asia.
That's not easy.
I mean, if you're the landmass that is US, or if you're the landmass that is Europe, or even landmass that is India or China, you are within a political boundary. Your one permit may get, you can work anywhere you want in that country. Whereas in Southeast Asia,
It's a microcosm of all these different interlocking different.
exactly. And I feel like if I could use that money to make, the movement of science and data easier across the political boundaries,
Borderless.
I think I would try that as much as I can. I'm not saying I bribe people. I'm saying I would try and invest in technologies that help. I would invest in programs that encourage the sharing of data.
Yep.
I think that's where I would put it.
Fantastic. That's really great. I love that sense of optimism. Thank you for walking me through all of this and your journey. It's fascinating. I love to hear that scientific perspective. It's really important that it resonates, and like you said, it's incredibly valued. And I really feel that sentiment changing around the need for listening to science and that collective union effectively with the private sector working towards a common good, right? We're looking to decarbonize. Let's have more granularity, more clarity around the carbon stocks so we can have much more confidence to then substantiate the claims that are made on the other side, the transaction side, and then ultimately the retirement piece. And then let's just work together to effectively mitigate emissions and protect the ecosystem.
We got one planet, dude.
That's it.
We got one planet.
Awesome, man.
It's all here.
Cheers to that.
Cheers,
Thanks very
man.
much, buddy.
Thank you.
Thanks. Awesome. Cut. Right on.
Woohoo!
Gosh, that was a masterclass.